It's been more than 400 years since the first wave of Africans were kidnapped and shipped to North America as part of our nation's barbaric slave trade, the backbone of America's economy for centuries. Slavery's ugly legacy is why many African Americans often hit a brick wall when it comes to learning more about their true family histories. This is very much an ongoing investigation. As a journalist for more than 35 years, my job focuses on covering our nation's justice system, including civil rights. The job involves informing the public and holding our leaders accountable. In short, we seek the truth. But from inside America's classroom to the statues in our communities, there's been a debate across our nation about how much of our dark past we should acknowledge or even talk about. In journalism, our job isn't to tell people how to think, but we do err on the side of the belief that providing more facts is always best. Confronting truth is not an easy task, and I have a personal admission. When it comes to my own family, I knew very little about slavery and its impact on my ancestors. And I have to admit, I intentionally fought learning more. But now, with the help of my colleagues at ABC News and my family, along with the genealogists and researchers from the 10 Million Names Project with whom ABC News has partnered, I have come full circle. This, for me, has been a revelatory journey. I now have a fuller understanding of where my ancestors were born into slavery and how they lived. Almost here to the plantation where my ancestors lived as enslaved people. This is kind of surreal.
It's incredibly hot, like it must have been back then, here on the outskirts of Huntington, West Virginia.
It feels strange, beautiful and scary, all in the same breath.
This is what is known as Green Bottom. It was a massive plantation operating in a time just before the Civil War. I was shocked to learn it was under the reign of a historic and infamous Confederate figure, Albert Gallatin Jenkins. Sitting on the east bank of the Ohio River, this is where Jenkins, Harvard graduate, two-term congressman, Confederate general, and staunch supporter of slavery, kept humans imprisoned, treating them as little more than valuable livestock. He was the dictator, lording over the sprawling 4,500-acre estate. This is also where my great-great-grandmother, Adeline Jenkins, daughter of Charlotte, was born into slavery. According to the 10 Million Names genealogists and researchers, it's very likely Adeline was the biological daughter of her enslaver, Jenkins himself.
Mr. Fain, Pierre Thomas, ABC News.
Nice to meet you, sir. Welcome to the Jenkins Plantation, the ancestral home of your great-great-great-great-grandmother, Adeline.
It's a blessing to be here, I think.
To the north is the Ohio River, and just across there, of course, is Ohio, Free Territory. To the south is where she would have been born in 1858. That's where the slave community existed.
Dr. Cicero Fain, author, Marshall University professor, and top expert in Black history in West Virginia.
At its height, how many slaves would have had here?
Probably would have been 80 to 100, and unquestionably, slave labor made the Jenkins family rich.
Rich indeed. In Congress, Jenkins made it exceedingly clear he believed slavery was the natural order of things, calling the institution the Alpha and the Omega, critical to the future of a prosperous America, especially in the South. In a lengthy speech on the House floor, 5 years before the 13th Amendment, Jenkins stood firm in his belief that even the idea of abolishing slavery was startling, alarming, and evil, saying in part it would mean to the South the loss of millions in property, and that slaves would make a run in mass across the border to freedom upon hearing that a Union president was elected, adding that returning slaves under the Fugitive Slave Act law would be difficult, making clear that he viewed slaves purely as property. At one point, Jenkins lays down the cold-blooded economics of the slave trade, saying 4 million slaves were estimated to be worth at least $3 billion.
His words allowed me to have a better perspective coming here today
and to know that's what my ancestors lived under. Dr. Fain shared other chilling facts about what Jenkins and many slaveholders did purely for profit.
You had primarily girls, older women, and boys, because Jenkins made a regular habit of selling off the young adult males at their prime stage so that he could make the most money. At the records show, Jenkins was cruel. And of course, the overseers that he hired, even more cruel, to the point of beating and then salting the wound afterwards. And so that was part of the day-to-day experience and existence of those folks in bondage.
I just want to take it in for a second.
Sure, I'll give you some space to do that, sir.
Just a second. Pardon, Mr. Fain. Many people think that most African Americans automatically say, oh, yes, I want to know everything about where I come from, and but for others, the notion of slavery is a painful process. Besides slaving the land, cooking for themselves and their overseers, and being at Jenkins' beck and call, historic preservationist Karen Nance explains how slaves also built the Jenkins home, brick by brick.
It took about 10 years, and the African Americans that were enslaved up here were the ones who built it. It took a long time because they had to make the brick, so it was a whole lot of labor.
Nothing was easy. One of the most difficult moments of my journey, walking inside this home, the place where Albert Gallatin Jenkins lorded over everything. I'm not sure how long I want to be in here. A Jenkins family ancestor greeted me.
I'm Victor Wilson.
Offering up a photo that included a slave his ancestors called Mary.
A friend of your great-grandmother. This is old Mary. She was nanny to my grandmother, my grandfather's brothers and sisters.
I'm just going to take a minute. It's hard for me to be here. It's a challenge. In fact, let's finish this conversation outside, if you don't mind. It was just an odd feeling, primarily because of what Jenkins believed. So that's why I couldn't be in. Victor Wilson, who is 75 years old, is pushing for historic markers in honor of the legacy of the Jenkins plantation slaves. When you think about your family, your pride in some of their accomplishments,
Correct.
how do you balance the slavery part of it? How do you balance that in your mind?
It's really very difficult. I, in my own generation, have no sympathy with slavery. I don't endorse the concept of slavery. It's wrong.
Obviously. Right.
It's wrong.
Established as a slave plantation in 1812 by Virginia Governor Wilson Nicholas, original documents show slaves were used by Nicholas as collateral for loans. A trust deed we found mentions 27 slaves, including a runaway named Moses, who's, quote, lurking in Ohio. A will drawn up by Albert Jenkins' father states he was leaving their family slave Mary to his sister, and the slave Jacob to be sold to whichever son would pay the most. A mile up the road, the slave cabins. Here is where my great-great-grandmother Adeline was likely born. It's not really ancient history. These cabins survived a long time.
Yeah.
The owner of the plantation had the power of life and death.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for people to fathom that in the modern world, but he could sell you, he could kill you because you were considered property. I wish they didn't have to go through what they went through. I'm proud of them, but I just wish. At nearby Marshall University in 2020, Jenkins' name was removed from what's now called the Education Building. His portrait, painted in the 1930s, remains stored in a corner of the school's Special Collections Department, run by Lori Thompson, who gave me an even deeper glimpse into what kind of man Jenkins truly was.
He was 100% adamant that the white race was the supreme race, and that he was very firm in his convictions. He would send out raider parties and would send out people to specifically look for the people who have run away. Some of his legacy is brutal.
I remember the whole issue of statues in public spaces, and the statues were initially intended to honor those people in certain parts of the South. But it would be as if our Jewish brothers and sisters in Germany would suddenly be walking through town and there would be a statue of Hitler.
Absolutely.
I see some books calling him gentleman soldier. I would not use that term, ever.
I ended my journey with Harvard University professor and 10 million name scholar, Dr. Vincent Brown.
This has been a professional and a personal journey I've been on in recent weeks. I guess I've been playing a psychological game with myself in that I was proud of knowing that my people could overcome something as horrible and as horrific as slavery. But I think intellectually I wanted to start my family's history with my grandmother. To go back too far is maybe too painful. And so I finally agreed reluctantly to do this digging. So as I'm riding to this property, the first thing I'm thinking, it's hot. It must have been like this for my ancestors. Hot, working in the fields. The pressure of it was building more and more of just the feeling of being in bondage.
Well, the first thing you have to know about the Confederacy, and the most important thing, is that they fought a civil war, the bloodiest war in America's history, to maintain slavery forever.
And for those who want to honor the Confederacy, and for those who want to glamorize it in any way, I'm sorry. I disagree as a man, I disagree as a journalist, and I disagree as an American.
What you're finding out is how tyrannical and brutal slavery was. And to report on that is something that makes people uncomfortable.
And I would use the word painful. Because while I was able to look at the portrait of Jenkins, I don't know what Adeline looks like.
Right.
And her mother, Charlotte.
We have more pictures of slaveholders than we have of enslaved people. If we don't tell those stories, we don't have a full accounting of our history.
It's a story of triumph in the midst of evil.
Without Charlotte and Adeline, there would be no Sally Jefferson, my great-grandmother. There would be no Annie Bell Brown, no matriarch, and no Helen Thomas, my extraordinary mother, who more than anyone else helped define me as a man.
Thank you keeps coming to mind. For Adeline, thank you. Thank you for the will to survive. Thank you for the will not to give up.